So despite what many people in this channel's comments seem to insist, I don't believe and have never said that AI is useless. There are tasks that I don't think today's AIs are capable of doing a decent job of, but there are many tasks for which this generation of AIs are superhuman. Things that have very clear measurable success criteria that can be used as a fitness function to train the AIs. For example, it's been decades since humans could beat computers in chess. They've surpassed us in Go. AI protein folding won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2024, and deservedly so. And then, of course, there's a huge variety of tasks in between that AIs might or ought to be able to do to some degree of success. Today, we're going to be talking about one of those, a task that an AI could do in theory, but is failing at in practice, at least to my standards. We're going to talk about why that might be and what that might mean to those of us that want to do real practical work with AI. Google, you'd think, ought to have the resources to have state-of-the-art AIs. They claim so, at least. In fact, they announced recently the first AI find of a zero-day security vulnerability. And that's really cool. However, there are relatively simple tasks that Google AIs ought to be able to do that it does much, much worse job of than it ought to and that an average human can do. There is one such specific task that drives me crazy almost every day, and that causes issues for lots and lots of people on this platform on a consistent basis. If you're watching this video, you're almost certainly affected by this garbage. YouTube's AI-generated subtitles are just This is the Internet of Bugs. My name is Carl. I've been a computer professional for more than 35 years now, and I get incredibly and professionally irritated by bugs that should be fixable, but that haven't been, and apparently aren't being fixed. The first 25 years of my career were before the cloud was really a thing, which meant all the places I worked had to host their own computers, and I spent lots of time in server rooms without hearing protection. So now, I need hearing aids, and I watch videos with subtitles on. Protect your hearing, kids. This has been your public service announcement for today. Anyway, I see a lot of video subtitles, and the subtitles on YouTube are among the worst. I could spend hours and hours going through example after example after example of YouTube subtitles being awful, but that would get old. So I'm just going to show you a couple of examples so that I have some specifics to refer to as we go through the video. So one more quick aside before the examples. I made a 2-minute long video to show YouTube creators how easy it is to fix their own captions with step-by-step instructions, and explained why correct captions will help them get more views and more viewers. It's linked from this video, but for convenience, I've also put it at iob.fyi/ytcc. Need help remembering that? It stands for Internet of Bugs. For your information /YouTube closed captions. If you are a YouTuber, please take the time to fix your captions. And if there are YouTubers that you follow that you think might benefit from him, please send them the link. I've even turned monetization off, so they shouldn't even have to sit through any ads to watch it. Okay, I guess that's 2 public service announcements for the day. I'm done now though, I promise. So here is a screenshot from a channel called AI Master. Now, no endorsement implied, I haven't even watched this video. I found it by searching YouTube for ChatGPT. That's Chad ending with a D as in dog or delta, and with a middle letter of the abbreviation being B as in boy or Bravo instead of P as in Papa like it's supposed to be. This video has 250,000 views, and the channel has almost 100,000 subscribers, so it's doing okay. In fact, it's the first search result for me when I search for ChatGPT spelled correctly as all one word. You would think that Google's AI would know that ChatGPT is a word. Google Trends certainly does. And before you think it's just a 6-month-old video, here's one from last week, where it not only transcribed it as GBT, as in Google Bad Titles, but also sometimes as GBD, which I guess could be an AI created by Batman to help the Gotham Police Department. I don't know. Hope that's not a spoiler. Just kidding. Don't worry, there will be no spoilers at all in this video. And I say that because my next example involves a TV show called Severance that started its 2nd season last week. Now, because of that, the cast has been doing a lot of interviews to promote it. The only thing I'm going to say about that show is that the show has some characters that are referred to as innies and some characters that are referred to as outies, like belly buttons are referred to sometimes. YouTube's transcriptions are all over the place when it comes to spelling innie. Usually it just makes up a jumble of letters. And with outie, it usually thinks it's a brand of German cars, which makes no sense at all in context. Google's search UI, the stupid one that says you should eat glue and rocks, it knows the correct words and spellings and can explain what they mean in the context of the show, which I blurred out here because, like I said, no spoilers. And if you do a YouTube search for those terms, you get a lot of hits. Interviews, some reviews, some explainer videos, etc. which means that YouTube has a search index of those terms in the context of a TV show named Severance. And before you say, well, it hasn't had time to get updated, here's a YouTube video from March 21st of 2022 discussing the episode 6 of season 1 with those terms in the first line of the description. So it's had a couple of months shy of 3 years to figure it out. And there are a ton of other videos since then. This is just the oldest one I could find in a couple of minutes of searching. Okay, so aside from me bitching about how fucked up, really? Okay, let's try that again. Aside from me complaining about how bad YouTube's captions are, what's the point of this video? This is one of the most practical, large-scale examples of how AI is currently deployed to do real work in the real world. Computer recognizing speech, especially in English, go back at least to 1952, when Bell Labs introduced Audrey, a computer that could recognize the spoken digits 1 to 9 with a 90% accuracy. So here we are 70 plus years later, and one of the largest, if not the largest installation of speech recognition does get the vast majority of the words correct, but it still falls down on unusual terms. And I'd argue that those unusual terms are the ones that are the most important to get right for search purposes. When you're searching for something, you want to search for the thing that's the most unusual, right? Searching for common terms like the are just useless. There's a phrase you might hear in computational search, TF-IDF, which stands for Term Frequency Inverse Document Frequency. That's roughly a measure of the number of times the term you're searching for appears in a given page or document, compared to the average count of that word appearing in the average document. It's a measure of the relevance of a document to a given search term, and it dates back to Karen Spark Jones in 1972. And it makes sense intuitively, right? The best search terms are the words that are most likely to be relevant to what you want to find, but are least likely to show up somewhere else. That's why you're much better off using Golang as a search term instead of Go if you want to know about the Go programming language. Which means, arguably, that the unusual words are the ones that are most important, or at least the very important to get correct. But YouTube's transcriptions, which are used to serve search results, in addition, of course, it uses titles and descriptions and keywords and stuff. That transcription does a worse job with most of those words than with common words, which is bad. So you'd think they'd fix it if they could, right? Now, it's possible that YouTube just doesn't care to get it correct, but I wouldn't think so, and I wouldn't hope so. If for no other reason than they're currently pushing their new auto-dubbing translation service, and they must be spending a ton of money and effort on that. It doesn't make sense to me that they'd spend what's obviously a lot of effort on translations, but not care about getting good versions of the core text that the translations are based on. So I think they probably do care, but maybe not a whole lot. So let's consider a better question. They would fix it if it were easy to fix, right? Right? So by extension then, the answer must be, it must not be easy to fix. Assuming that we're software developers and/or people who want to use the current generation of AIs to do real practical work, then understanding what's going on here could be very useful. And if you're not in one of those categories, I don't know why you're still watching, but thanks for the engagement. I don't have any inside knowledge. I don't know anybody in that part of Google. So this is just educated speculation, but these are the conclusions I think are relatively safe to draw from this situation. First off, we need to face the fact that AI does not just work out of the box, at least not at scale. If we're going to use it for something practical, or if someone is going to try to use it to replace an employee who does practical work, it's very unlikely to just work out of the box. If it worked well, it would work well for Google. As an aside, I'll put a link down in the description. Someone has just done a write-up on their first month with Devin, and it turns out that it just doesn't work out of the box either. That's a common theme with a lot of the AI hype. It gets so much stuff correct right off the bat that it seems like the problem is very close to being solved. But then when you dig into the details, you discover that getting the last few % of things right is going to take a ton more effort. And until that part works, the whole final output product suffers. Second, I can say anecdotally that YouTube's transcription does poorer on newer things. Both of the examples that I'm using here are things that are 3 years old or so, but that seems new still compared to the volume of data older than that. LLMs seem to have a primacy bias and/or a familiarity bias. They seem to weigh answers more highly if they've seen them earlier and more often in the training set. I haven't done or seen a rigorous statistical analysis of this, but it seems to be the case. And not just in this, but with many of my previous findings, like the work I did on AI-generated prime number sieves with Proof News a few months back. So now that we've got that out of the way, there are some guesses we can make and some conclusions we can try to reason through. These could be wrong, but they seem to be decent working hypotheses to me. One possibility is that modern ChatGPT or Google Gemini generation AI is so hideously expensive that YouTube doesn't make enough money to afford it, And YouTube is forced to use an old crappy AI, which means that what we're talking about today isn't relevant to LLM's projects. If that's true, that says some really scary things about how unlikely AI is to be useful or at least affordable anytime soon. I hope that's not the case, and I doubt it is, if for no other reason than if it was just a cost issue, there's a much better solution. Only a tiny fraction of videos get very many views. See this graph, which means that you could use a modern AI to generate the captions on the important videos, the ones likely to get a lot of views, like, the ones from really big channels about Grammy-winning TV shows, and then you could use a cheap AI on the rest of the videos. But given that if you look at the screenshots of the interviews earlier in the video, you notice that both of those interview channels have more than 1 million subscribers. One of them has 18 million. So if it were feasible to use a modern AI on that fraction of videos that were important, I would expect those two, or at least the big one, to have gotten the good AI. And obviously, the AI didn't do a good job, so I don't think that's it. The next possibility is that the problem is just intractably hard. Even the best possible modern technology can't distinguish Audi, the protruding belly button, from Audi, the car brand, and I just don't buy that. It's easy for us to tell that it should be Innie and Audi because it's right there in the title of the video. With context, it's blatantly obvious. Now, there may certainly be some words that can't be distinguished by the AI, but the videos that I'm using as examples, I deliberately picked because the words the AI was getting wrong were consistently interpreted wrong and were easily found in the video titles. So with the context from the titles, they should have been easy to figure out, which means that it's very, very likely that for some reason, the YouTube's transcription AI cannot make use of the titles or descriptions of the videos doing the transcription. Now, I don't know why that is, but it seems a logical conclusion. So it's likely to be infeasible, if not impossible, to apply the context of the title and description to the transcription process, at least not at scale. If that's true, that kind of feels like the memento guy syndrome I've talked about before. Like the parser has long-term memory from its training data it can use, but it can't hold much in its short-term memory, and the short-term memory doesn't make it to long-term. I don't know for sure that that's what's going on, but for purposes of thinking about how you might build your own AI-based product or service, I think it's safe to assume that the specific context and recent information, data that's only existed in the last couple of years, are likely to be a lot more risky to try to build a product on top of compared to older topics that are more common in the training sets. That's a potential risk for the project I'm starting now, which involves using LLMs to summarize research papers that, by definition, involve information that won't have been present in the LLM's training set, but more on that in future videos. I think about risk a lot when it comes to projects. In general, risk is one of the most important factors that I use in deciding what order to build things. People, for some reason, tend to put off the risky things until late in the project, which means that in the likely event that riskier things take longer than you expect, not only are you going to be late, but you're going to be unexpectedly late. So I tend to try to get the risky things out of the way earlier, knowing that might change the schedule and they might take longer than I thought. But I'd rather get a month into a 6-month project and then realize it's going to be an 8th-month project, so I can take steps to adjust scope or budget or something to try to make everybody as happy as I can. Otherwise, you get 5 months into a 6-month project and suddenly the time left till completion triples from 1 month to 3. And most of the stuff that you might be able to push to a later release in order to get your schedule back on track have already been done. I think these kinds of discussions are very useful exercises. One thing that's been very useful in my career when I'm talking to clients and or scoping a project I haven't done before is to look at public examples of projects with related technology and try to extrapolate from what's already out there. If there's a feature that a ton of people already have, it's probably easy to build. And if there's a feature that seems like it ought to be there but isn't, or doesn't work right, it's probably a lot more difficult than you'd think, which means it might be a risk that's either better avoided, or it might be an opportunity to solve a problem that no one else seems to be prioritizing. But it almost certainly means it's worth extra attention. And again, that kind of analysis is the kind of thing that an AI software developer is unlikely to do well. Devin's not going to have a clue about that kind of stuff. Taking a very vague idea and trying to figure out what evidence you can find that will help you narrow down what warrants further investigation in the problem is very incredibly useful if you want to be the kind of developer that decides what ought to be done, as opposed to the kind of developer that is told what to do all the time by somebody else. Hopefully that was helpful or at least interesting. And here again is the link to the video with the step-by-step instructions on how to manually fix YouTube subtitles for you to follow yourself or for you to send to your favorite YouTuber. Thanks for watching, and never forget that, like YouTube, the internet is full of bugs. Let's be careful out there.